I never thought a simple fence would turn my grandfather into a neighborhood legend, but when the Willowbrook HOA decided to mess with a 78-year-old Korean War veteran who'd spent 40 years as a civil engineer, they picked the wrong fight. What started as harassment over a property line became the most spectacular takedown I've ever witnessed. My name is David, and this is the story of how my grandfather taught an entire HOA board that some battles you just can't win. But first, let me tell you what I found when I pulled into his driveway that Tuesday morning, because what I saw changed everything. My grandfather, Frank Miller, had lived in the same house for 32 years. Quiet street, mature oak trees, the kind of neighborhood where people used to know each other's names. That all changed when Willowbrook got its first HOA 3 years ago, led by a woman named Patricia Hoffman. Think every Karen stereotype rolled into one power-hungry package, complete with the blonde bob and the attitude that rules were made for everyone else to follow. Grandpa Frank wasn't your typical elderly resident, 6'2", still built like the Army Ranger he used to be, with hands that could sketch a blueprint or fix any machine you put in front of him. After Korea, he'd spent 4 decades designing bridges and municipal buildings. The man understood construction, engineering, and most importantly, property law. The trouble started when Patricia decided Grandpa's old chain-link fence was aesthetically incompatible with their new community standards. Never mind that his fence had been there since 1991, 10 years before the HOA even existed. Never mind that it was perfectly maintained and completely within his property lines. Patricia wanted uniformity, and Grandpa's practical chain link didn't match her vision of white vinyl perfection. Comment which country you're watching from. I'm curious how many of you have dealt with HOA nightmares like this one. The first letter arrived on a Wednesday. Standard HOA intimidation tactics. Notice of violation. Immediate compliance required. Threats of daily fines starting at $50. Grandpa read it, chuckled, and filed it in what he called his circular file, the trash can. That's when Patricia made her first mistake. She assumed silence meant submission. The letters escalated quickly. $50 daily fines became $100 fines. Legal action threats became lying on property warnings. Patricia was building her case like she was taking down a criminal empire, not harassing a veteran over a fence that predated her authority. But here's what Patricia didn't know. Grandpa Frank had been quietly doing his homework. While she was writing threatening letters, he was at the county courthouse, pulling property records, surveying documents, and HOA formation paperwork. What he found made him smile, that particular smile he got when he was about to prove someone very, very wrong. See, Patricia's power trip had a fatal flaw. The HOA covenants clearly stated they only applied to properties that voluntarily joined after the association's 2019 formation. Grandpa's house, purchased in 1991, was explicitly grandfathered out. But more importantly, Patricia had been threatening to place liens and pursue legal action without proper authority, which, as Grandpa's research revealed, constituted harassment under state law. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning. I was visiting Grandpa for our weekly coffee when we heard the sound of machinery outside. Through the kitchen window, we watched a HOA hired crew setting up to remove his fence. Patricia stood there supervising, clipboard in hand like she was commanding a military operation. "Frank Miller," she shouted across the yard. "This fence comes down today, with or without your cooperation." Grandpa set down his coffee cup very carefully. That's when I knew Patricia had just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. "David," he said quietly, "go get my surveying equipment from the garage. The good stuff, the laser level and the measuring chains. And bring my camera." I'd seen Grandpa in work mode before, but this was different. This was surgical precision with a purpose. What happened next was like watching a master class in how to destroy someone with nothing but facts, preparation, and 40 years of engineering experience. Grandpa walked outside, not hurried, not angry, just purposeful. The work crew stopped when they saw him approaching. Patricia, however, was just getting started. "Mr. Miller, you've ignored 17 certified letters. This fence violates community standards, and it's coming down now." Grandpa nodded politely. "Ma'am, before your crew damages my property, I'd like to show you something." He pulled out a folder, not just any folder, but one of those engineer's portfolios with the clear plastic sleeves and the professional binding. Patricia's confidence flickered for just a second. "This," Grandpa said, opening to the first page, is the original 1991 property survey showing my fence location. This is the 2019 HOA covenant document with the grandfathering clause highlighted. And this is the county recorder's office certification that my property predates your authority by 28 years. The work crew was already looking uncomfortable. These guys knew enough about property law to recognize trouble when they saw it. But Grandpa wasn't finished. Now Patricia, this is the interesting part. He flipped to another section. These are copies of all 17 letters you sent me, along with the state harassment statute you've been violating. And this, he held up a final document, is the restraining order I filed yesterday, which legally prohibits you from trespassing on my property or directing others to damage it. Patricia's face went from confident to confused, to the pale white of someone realizing they'd just walked into a trap. That's impossible, she stammered. I'm the HOA president, I have authority over properties that joined your association voluntarily. After 2019, Grandpa finished. Mine didn't. Never will. The coup de grace came when Grandpa pulled out his phone and showed Patricia the recording app that had been running the entire time. Everything you've said about removing my fence and violating my property rights is now documented evidence for the harassment lawsuit my attorney will be filing Monday morning. What followed was the most beautiful retreat I've ever witnessed. Patricia tried to save face, claiming miscommunication and reviewing procedures, but the damage was done. The work crew packed up without touching a single fence post. Several neighbors who'd been watching from their windows came over to congratulate Grandpa and ask for copies of his research. Turns out Patricia had been bullying half the street with similar tactics. Within 2 weeks, Patricia was facing 3 separate lawsuits: Grandpa's harassment case, a class action from other affected neighbors, and an investigation from the state attorney general's office for HOA misconduct. The legal fees alone cost the association their entire annual budget. The real victory came 6 months later when Patricia resigned in disgrace, and the HOA voted to dissolve entirely. Property values actually went up once people realized they could maintain their homes without asking permission from a power-hungry board. As for Grandpa's fence, it's still standing, exactly where it's been since 1991. But now it's got a small plaque next to it that reads "Installed 1991. Defended 2024, Frank Miller, Korean War veteran and HOA slayer." My grandfather taught me that the best defense against bullies isn't anger or aggression, it's preparation, patience, and knowing your rights better than they know theirs. Patricia thought she could intimidate a quiet old man into submission. She didn't realize she was picking a fight with someone who'd built bridges that could withstand hurricanes and had faced down enemies with a lot more firepower than a clipboard and an attitude. What would you have done in Grandpa's situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed watching justice served with a side of engineering precision, hit that like button and subscribe, because I've got more stories about people who learned the hard way that you don't mess with veterans, engineers, or anyone who combines both. Trust me, the next one involves an HOA, a purple house, and a chemical engineer who turned his lawn into a science experiment. You won't want to miss it.